Good day and welcome everyone. This is the Parsons Mobility Solutions Landscape Architecture and Urban Design Conference call hosted by Scott Harso. My name is Marcel and I'm the operator for this call. During the presentation, your lines remain on listen only. If you need help at any time, please press *0 on your line and the coordinator will be happy to assist. I would also like to advise all parties that this conference today is being recorded. And now I am handing over to Scott. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Marcel, and welcome everybody. We're glad to have you with us for a presentation today. This will be our final presentation of 2020. We tend to take the month of December as a break since everyone is trying to finish up their year and also to give everybody a chance to have a break for the holidays. So I hope you enjoy what we have today, which keeps in our theme of providing project solutions and adding value to clients. So, next slide.
Okay. All right. A minute.
We'll give you a few of our standard housekeeping items here. As mentioned, all of your phones remain on mute to cut down on background noise and enhance everyone's listening pleasure and ability here. You can submit questions in the Q&A section of the WebEx, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. We'll have 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A time at that point. And if you could state your name so that in case we need to follow up with a more detailed answer, we'll be able to get back in touch with you. Our presenters, and we have two for you today. Our first presenter is Jeff Lormond. Jeff is a senior project landscape architect with Parsons. He does a lot of transportation landscape work, but also environmental planning and has experience with some urban design projects, well-versed in the urban environments as well as working on the native environment and reestablishment. And we have Natalia Cahide-Elmer, who is an environmental engineer, project manager, and landscape architect designer for Parsons. She's got experience with ecological restoration and monitoring, urban forestry, site engineering, and environmental design, and does a lot of work for our Parsons landscape architecture teams as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff for our core value moment.
All right, thank you. So yes, our core value moment, this being a presentation on landscape architecture, we've naturally gravitated to sustainability as one of our core values because it really is a core value within landscape architecture, not just Parsons, but within landscape architecture as a profession. What you see here is from the American Society of Landscape Architects, the public policy on environmental sustainability. And I paraphrased it some, they were very wordy, but landscape architects should share knowledge and encourage communication between colleagues, professionals, other disciplines and fields, public officials and community leaders, clients, developers, contractors, manufacturers, and suppliers to help understand and enhance the interrelationships between the man-made and natural environments, to help to understand and implement sustainable practices, to improve existing sustainable practices, and to encourage the use of sustainable practices in our environments. A lot of what we do here at Parsons as landscape architects is creating those sustainable environments for our projects. So our agenda for today, we are going to discuss the what, where, who, and why of Parsons landscape architecture. The what of Parsons landscape architecture. What we do, we analyze, plan, design, manage, and nurture the built and natural environments. We design public realm, including soft and hardscape design, from roadsides to parks, trails to building grounds, and environmental analysis to revegetation. We apply context-sensitive design solutions, and we work collaboratively with other disciplines and can have a significant impact on the project's outcome and acceptance. And we'll go into these a little bit more as we discuss some of the projects. Given the push to increase funding to repair and replace our crumbling infrastructure, the question becomes, how best to incorporate landscape architects to be part of this effort? And what we bring to the table is that landscape architects are skilled at looking holistically at a project. We see the big picture and seeing how the pieces fit or don't fit within a community. Landscape architects can form a bridge between the engineering aspects of a project and the stakeholders, and landscape architects can provide value-added pieces that are necessary to get community buy-in for a project. And this is just a few of the talents we bring to the table. So what are our typical project types? A lot of what we do is transportation corridors, and that's highway and freeway, and that's roadside treatments, and structural and corridor aesthetics, but also transit corridors and transit stations. Design builds and construction management and oversight has been a large piece of what we have been doing for the last 20 years. But in urban development, we look at streetscapes and urban design, green streets and low-impact development, trails and bikeway facilities, site development, redevelopment planning, parks and public spaces, and environmental considerations, revegetation and habitat restoration, creek and stream restoration, a similar topic, and visual impact assessments is another big part of what we do. The where of Parsons landscape architecture. So where are our projects? Where have we done these treatments and these designs? So we're going to go through some of those categories that we just have talked about, and we'll talk about some of the projects. We'll talk briefly about some of these projects. Freeway and highway roadside treatments. We see from this list here that we're working in a lot of places. Coors I-40 in Albuquerque, the T-Rex project in Denver, Pioneer Crossing, Utah, and US 23 in Michigan, where we're looking at the roadside treatments. But also, as part of those, structural and corridor aesthetics are an increasingly large part of what we do. If you think about a highway or a freeway going through a community, that it's going to be widened, it's going to be improved. The elements that go in with that are in addition to widening of the pavement, are the bridges and the sound walls and retaining walls in those structures. And given that freeways and highways have really become the main streets, it is how a lot of people interact with the community, or not, depending on the corridor, because a lot of these corridors, if there hasn't been care taken into the aesthetics of the corridor, it's just a pass-through. And so these elements, these things you see here are how a community can express itself to people traveling on that main street, on that main highway. This is who we are, and so it's a really good opportunity for them to put the context of the community people are driving through out there for people to see. One of the projects I went on to just point out here was the Santa Fe-Oxford intersection, which is in the upper right. That was one of the very first, that was when this kind of graphics and aesthetics were just getting started on retaining walls and all. And that was back in the day when we would have to cut, everything had to be silhouettes because it was cut out of masonite and it was attached to the fractured thin form liner and caulked behind, and then that was used as the form. So you didn't have a lot of choice, but you could create these images, these silhouettes. But if you contrast that with the one that's right below it, which is one of our more recent projects, State Highway 183 in Dallas, you can see just the progression of what the possibilities have become for the communities and how they can express themselves. You can get a lot more texture and imagery out there on these now. It's just a market over the last 30 years, I guess, how much that has changed. Transit corridors and transit stations. These are some of our current projects. The one in the upper left is the HEART project in Honolulu, Hawaii. We were responsible for the planting and irrigation design as well as the station plaza layouts. That one, it's a design build project, so we are working with the contractors team to ensure that we are implementing these correctly according to the project requirements. The project across the bottom is the Federal Way light rail extension in the Seattle area, And that project, we are overseeing DBE, landscape architect, who is doing the planting and irrigation design, and we're helping them, as well as we are responsible for laying out all the plaza and site furnishings for these relatively large station areas, and then some additional elements like wetlands and things like that. But smaller scale, you look at the BRT, transit stops. What are those going to look like? What should the shelters look like? Particularly with BRT, they usually have a thematic approach to them. This one is in Boulder, Colorado, along US 36, but we're also working on one which is in more on city streets in Rancho Cucamonga, California. Design, builds, and construction management and oversight. As I said, this has been a big piece of our work over the last 20 years. And we work on both sides of the equation. We can work for the contractor, as we are in HART and on the Federal Way project, or we work for the owner as an owner's rep to ensure that the contractor is meeting the requirements that were established in the contract. The one in the upper right is the Interstate 405 in Orange County. On that project, we are oversight and helping OCTA on that. Because landscape architecture and design builds, we have to take a little bit more care in presenting to the contracting teams that are bidding it what exactly they need to include in their bid for landscape and aesthetic requirements. To some extent, aesthetics and landscape are the beauties in the eye of the beholder, yes. But so we have to sort of establish what exactly the requirements are by working with the stakeholders and working with the owners to produce that. It's on some of the other disciplines. They have established requirements for roadway widths and lane widths and safety and those elements. That we don't have that nearly as much with landscape architecture. So in the case of the 405, what we did is we worked with the stakeholders, the four cities in the corridor, as well as Caltrans, to produce a corridor master plan for the project that established what the end result look of the aesthetics needed to be for both retaining walls, which are two types you see here, as well as what the bridges would look like. And then that was folded into the project requirements as part of the technical provisions. It needs to have a fairly high requirement so that the contractor knows exactly what to do and to get the final result we want. Moving on, the project in the lower right, that's I-15 Tropicana to Blue Diamond. Again, it was an oversight project where we were ensuring that the requirements that were established for the bidders were produced by the contractor. The lower middle is the SR91 project, which had a lot of, that's in Corona, California, and it had a lot of native habitat restoration because we were following the course of the Santa Ana River through part of it, and so we needed to do more revegetation, naturalization. And the last project up there is the Park to Plat P2P project in Denver, and that was a traditional design bid build project where we were hired by the city to oversee the contractor to ensure that what was constructed was meeting the project requirements. Moving on to streetscape and urban design, this is also a very big part of landscape architecture in the transportation area. There are so many elements that can go into making these corridors. Is it pavers like you see there? Is it just concrete, colored concrete? What's the score patterns? How do you work in the trees and tree grate plantings? Are there site furnishings? Are there railings? There are a whole host of that.
Jeffrey has disconnected from the line, but he will be dialing him back in shortly.
Hello, everyone. This is Natalia Cajeda-Elmer speaking. I'm the second speaker. I'm jumping in a little bit more ahead from time than initially expected, but as we're waiting for Jeff to jump in, I just wanted to fill in the gap a little bit and not have a huge gap for you guys. In speaking about streetscape and urban design, as Jeff was saying, there's a whole array of different materials that need to be looked at very carefully to be able to integrate them and ultimately provide a more holistic design. I just saw the slide move. I'm wondering if Jeff is back on for us. Jeff, are you there? I think he's still trying to resolve his issue. So really, when we come to these kinds of projects, a lot of times we find ourselves that we're brought in at the last stage. The transportation engineering is done, and they bring in the landscape designer to put in the plantings and pretty much call it a day. And really, the services that we provide for these kinds of urban designs and what you're seeing right now are green streets, which I'm sure Jeff will jump into in a little bit, really encompass a wide array of really in-depth details that we need to be involved from the beginning in terms of the choice of materials, color palettes, different types of amenities associated to the design, to avoid it being broken up and having different elements plugged into together. You want to have a holistic design especially when you're designing complete streets. That integrates your lighting, your street amenities, your barriers, you name it, and ultimately also the planting. It's not a question of going out and finding something that flowers at a certain point of the year and that's it. A lot of times, more often than not, we're really driving those designs to the next step and looking to see what are the most sustainable plants that we can choose, what plant palette can we take from for maintenance plantings, reducing the requirements of maintenance, reducing the requirements for irrigation in many cases as well, and how can we ultimately make these planted areas more sustainable in the long run and more durable given the harsh conditions that you would often find in an urban area. So those are all considerations that we bring to the table. And in the case of green streets that we're seeing, you will also find that you can we provide information in terms of how to include the infrastructure associated to those green streets, that green infrastructure, rain gardens, bioretention areas, that kind of thing. So there's a whole array of detailing which really benefits when we're involved earlier in the process rather than later. I want to check in with the team here, see how we're doing. Jeff, have you been able to call in again? Let's see how we can resolve this. He's calling in from Denver, so we're spread out over the U.S. At this point. Unfortunately, we're not in close proximity to one another. I think he's just about to jump back on.
I'm back.
There you are. Hello, Jeff.
Sorry about that. Oh, I think this connection's a bad connection, too. Let me try it one more time, see if I get a better connection. Sorry, everyone.
No worries. There always has to be a technical issue. Of course, this never happens when we practice this again and again and again. So our apologies to everyone for that. I was just telling the group about all the different aspects that we bring to the table when designing complete streets and green infrastructure, that kind of thing, and that at times we're brought in at the end of the project. and being integrated early on really drives to more holistic design, and more often than not cost savings as well, and saving having to rework design items that hadn't been considered earlier on by the transportation engineers and so on and so forth. We really benefit in being involved from the beginning.
Okay. Well, all right. Is that better? It's a little better.
Yeah, I could see you.
Okay.
All
right. Sorry, everybody. AT&T is my best friend right now. It's not. Okay. Green streets and low-impact development facilities. So often as part of the streetscape that we were just talking about before I was so rudely interrupted, the low-impact development is often included in that nowadays, where we are looking at doing something with the stormwaters to create microbasins, to get greater percolation into the groundwater and reduce the amount of water going into the storm sewers, reduce the stress on the storm sewer system. And so that also involves a lot of streetscape elements. So what do these microbasins look like? What are their plantings going to look like? And railings to protect so people don't fall into them. So that they all become all part of the streetscape elements of the project. Trails and bikeway facilities. These are some of our recent bikeway facilities, including the Amagosa Mountain Bike Trail, which went up the side of Black Mountain in Henderson, Nevada, which was a pretty good clip for the temperatures that you have in Nevada, but I think a lot of people have used it and enjoyed it. The Alcor Expressway Bike Trail in Doha is quite a feat. It is a high-speed bikeway, and it covers 50 kilometers, and was actually an award-winning project for being one of the biggest, longest high-speed bikeways in the world. So, and these bikeways can be in or outside the corridor. You have the Green Mountain Multi-Use Trail there, and that's within a roadway corridor. And part of the trick with that is, one, you have enough right-of-way to do that, but two, you keep the safety of keeping people off the roadway. And those are all elements that are included in that design approach. Site development and redevelopment, these are a couple of really interesting projects that we were involved in. The Ministry of Housing project in Saudi Arabia I personally spent 7 months in Saudi Arabia, as did members of my team, where we were developing master plans for 11 communities across the kingdom, and master planning out how we were responsible for figuring out how the housing and the blocks and how that all worked with the parks and the schools and the commercial areas and the mosques, and how that all came together to create these communities. The other project on this board is a really interesting project that Parsons actually did as part of it. It was a pro bono project out in Fort Irwin near Barstow, California. Believe it or not, Fort Irwin has the iconic fire truck from 9/11, the one that was driven up onto the rubble during the rescue and recovery period. That fire truck was eventually going to be sold as scrap, and the fire chief in Fort Irwin raised the money to buy the truck, save it from scrap, and then bring it out to Fort Irwin. And so what we were responsible for was coming up with this design for a memorial that had the fire truck as the keystone element of the memorial. Parks and recreation facilities is another big part of what we do. The Robert Moses Parkway removal is probably one of the larger ones that we've worked on. This is on the banks of the Niagara River, and it involved the removal of a 4-lane high-speed parkway through this area and a large bridge overcrossing, and then revegetation and renewal of the area. Originally, with the parkway in there, this is in Niagara and very close to Niagara Falls, and there was just a disconnect between the river and the community, and this parkway and removal of this parkway and putting this park in here sort of reconnected the community to its river. but also smaller facilities, picnic facilities, recreation facilities like tennis courts, soccer fields. We've even designed a disc golf course and playgrounds. Revegetation and native habitat restoration. Now, we've been talking about these projects as sort of individual. On this project we did this, on this project we did this. But in reality, a lot of this all folds. A lot of these fold together. Like previously, where we talked about the transportation corridors and the roadside treatments and the structural aesthetics. That's a treatment for one project corridor. Revegetation often falls in that as well, where if depending on where the roadway is located, the emphasis might be more on revegetation and native habitat restoration on the outside of the roads than it is for classic urban design parkway kind of treatment. And so we do a lot of that. One of my first projects for Parsons was the Provo Canyon Parkway in Provo Canyon, Utah, where we had 91 acres that we had to reestablish a native habitat on after all the work was done. One of the big projects where we've done that is the Lake Onondaga habitat restoration, and Natalia is going to talk about that in a little bit, more in depth. And something similar to that, stream restoration, where you have to repair the degraded stream banks and things like that. The photograph you see there is Clear Creek along US 6 in Colorado, in the Colorado Mountains. And in that project, there was a lot of, they were doing some tweaking to the roadway, but there was also a lot of mine tailings along the banks of the creek, which were leaching into the creek and all. So they had to reestablish that, a natural flow to the stream and get the mine tailings out and reestablish a natural habitat to it. Visual impact assessments, this is part of an environmental impact assessment, environmental impact statement. This is one of the reports that goes into it. And we've done a lot of these as well, particularly in California. But this is an opportunity. I look at this as really an opportunity for us to help explain to the public just what they're going to see with the new project. We usually evaluate alternatives, but this is what you're going to see with these alternatives, so that they can make an evaluation themselves if they're very concerned. The bridge that you see there in the upper left, the existing bridge is an iconic bridge. This is over the Los Angeles River. It's a historic bridge. It was in the movie Grease. The Los Angeles River is a concrete channel there. And that's where the drag racing scene went on in Greece. And when we were working on this analysis, it was, I swear that this was in every car commercial on TV during this analysis, had this bridge in it. But the bridge had major structural issues, and so it had to come down despite its historic nature. And so we had to explain to the community, these are possibilities. This is what you might see as with another iconic bridge, not the same iconic bridge, but a different iconic bridge, so that the public has an opportunity to evaluate what the changes are going to be to their visual environment. The who of Parsons landscape architecture. Who are we? Landscape architecture has been part of Parsons for at least 46 years that I know of, beginning with the Glenwood Canyon project in Colorado. We have grown since then. At that point, it was one person, and since then we have grown to a staff of 9, primarily a core staff of 9 in the mobility solutions in Parsons Mobility Division, with additional resources in other divisions that we'll talk about in a sec. But so there's me leading the Mountain and West region and the Eastern Central region led by Norman. But what's really important to understand here is that we're one team. We share work back and forth, and it really it can make for a very productive use of time. As an example, Matt Scholl is in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was the lead designer for the stations on the HART project we talked about a little bit ago. he's 2 hours ahead of Denver. So he would start his day and start on the station designs. And then when his day was over, we'd be able to pick up and finish. And in Hawaii is 3 to 4 hours, depending on time of year, from Denver, and we would be able to get the project to them on time. So it works out really well. We're doing something similar on the Federal Way project, where Norman is leading some of the station plaza paving, but we have people in Denver working on it as well. But as I said, we also have additional resources. There are resources in what Parsons has as the federal division, and a lot of these are landscape architects with a planning bent, and we have worked well with them as well over the years. Where are we licensed? That's always a big consideration. But I want to caution you that it's not necessarily the only consideration, because we are CLARB, our landscape architects are CLARB certified, and so if we need to get registration in another state, it's very easy for us to do, to have CLARB send all the information to the state and have that, to have the license quickly. But also, depending on the work that you are looking for us to do, we may not necessarily even need a license in the state. If we're primarily doing structural aesthetics, that is not going to be stamped by a landscape architect. That'll be stamped by the engineering team, and we will provide input and produce plans for them, but they will be responsible for stamping them. So depending on the work involved and the work you're looking for, we can do it. Why? The why of Parsons Landscape Architecture, how we provide added value. Visibility, impact, perception. So we may be in the bottom, the landscape and aesthetics usually falls in the bottom 1% of construction budgets, but it's in the top 99% of visibility. It's what the public sees. So if you have a transportation corridor, yes, they're going to see that there are added lanes, it's flowing better, but what they're really going to see is what it looks like and what it means for their community and how does it express how their community looks like. The 405 project I talked about a little bit ago, when I was doing the initial analysis for that budget and figuring out what we could do, the budget at 2 to 3% of the project was somewhere around in the $30 to $32 million budget for landscape and aesthetics. But that's on a $1.2, $1.4 billion job. So it's a very small piece, but it has a huge impact to how the project is perceived. And to do that, we work with stakeholders and sometimes the public, depending on how things are set up to make these things happen. All right, let's see if it will let me advance now. There we go. Sustainability, diversity, and resiliency. Climate change adaptability. As I said, landscape architecture is really one of the primary fields where sustainability is implemented, and our designs need to reflect that. So we can lead in helping that with getting that included in the projects. We have project lifecycle costs. That's always an important thing, particularly for maintenance. Site context, collaboration, integrating sites with their context and their stakeholders. We provide those solutions that bring everything together. So our bottom line is benefits to the client. It allows a more direct link between engineering teams and the project landscape and aesthetics. Often, we're given landscape is given to DBEs, but it's very helpful to have Parsons Landscape Architects as an oversight, or depending on the workload, DBEs tend to be small. It's good to break out pieces of the work and keep it within Parsons because you have more functionality between the disciplines within Parsons. I'm running out of time here, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but we can bring a lot of this to the table with our experience and what we've done and our knowledge and it really would be a benefit to the projects to have us involved. So I'm now going to turn this over to Natalia, who will go through an example project of added value and extension of services.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. So I'm going to showcase one project a little bit different from the transportation corridors that we've been seeing, although we have been showing some other examples along the way as well. More related to a project which has a very strong environmental component. So the Onondaga Lake program, for those of you who are not familiar with Onondaga Lake, it's a large, roughly 1 mile long lake right adjacent to the Finger Lake region, located in upstate New York, Syracuse, and we've got an office in Syracuse where I'm based out of. This lake is right adjacent to the city of Syracuse. It's surrounded by industrial areas, wastewater infrastructure, expressways, and so it has been really impacted over the years. In fact, it was known in its time to be one of the most impacted lakes in the U.S. And after years and years of pollution control efforts, improved municipal water treatment facilities, and of course the cleanup efforts, this is a Superfund site. The cleanup efforts, the planning for it began in the early 2000s. So we've been pretty much been working on this for 20 years, and the remedy was completed in 2016. So after all of these efforts, we can say that right now the lake is the cleanest it has been in the last 100 years. So it's been an immense success story. Of course, this project is part of a huge multidisciplinary team that go beyond Parsons, a lot of partnering teams that came together to support our clients to accomplish this incredible feat. But in terms of restoration work and the side that I was more involved with, or our landscape group were more involved with, on and off, the 90 acres were restored, of wetlands were restored, 1.1 million plants were installed, and this was all as part of the remedy of the lake. So currently, now that the remedy is completed, we've been involved in the NRD, the natural resource damages portion of the project, which is the phase we're in right now. Next slide, please. So what is NRD? As the remedy was reaching its completion, discussions were being held between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, our client, and also the local county, and they were looking to achieve a settlement for natural resource damages. And so we reached that settlement in 2017, straight after the completion of the remedy, and it equated to a program of 19 projects, some associated to habitat restoration and some associated to the increase of recreation opportunities. This type of process is usually resolved over many, many years. The involvement of our landscape team was where we came in early on and helped provide conceptual designs and visualizations such as the ones that you're seeing, where we helped the stakeholders and the trustees visualize what the concepts and proposed ideas were. This drove ultimately to quicker agreements. We got the trustees excited about these projects, and we were able to quickly shift from the discussions on damages determinations to a selection, an active selection of projects and a path forward focused on the compensation to the public and the environment as opposed to damages. So we got a buy-in both from the trustees and the clients straight early on, and it resulted from a strong collaboration throughout all of our multidisciplinary teams and our landscape group. Next slide, please. So these projects, these 19 projects, half of them were focused on habitat improvements, the other half roughly were on recreational improvements, and these varied from habitat enhancements, living shoreline designs, public fishing rights and access, boat launches, fishing piers, trails with overlooks, resting areas, a whole wide array of different types of projects. And it's good to note that initially the client, we were involved early on given our involvement in the remedy and to help aid our clients in the discussions and the negotiations. But given the success of the story and also as the client started seeing our capabilities and consulting on the design details, we were able to get their buy-in early on these projects. And ultimately we ended up performing the designs for a lot of these projects and which ended up turning into design builds for Parsons as well. So it's a great success story on our end as we were able to further show them our capabilities that went beyond the technical remedy, if you will. This array of concepts and ideas integrated into a very project-focused process, which had required very heavy communication and visualization needs, and that's where our team really were able to step in and help drive the project and conceptual design, and ultimately influence the decisions made between the trustees, the principal parties, and increase overall cooperation between all groups. Next slide, please. So once we got through all the conceptual design, then of course you start thinking about implementation, and our role didn't stop there. We had already been involved in the remedy and oversight of some of the habitat components of the remedy and monitoring, post-construction monitoring work as well. So as these projects came to fruition, we were able to further provide consulting and help on plants, design details, and then quality control, quality assurance, quality control on the planting materials, plant installations. And we also consulted on aesthetics and materials for access paths, barriers, and signage. We consulted on visual impacts, which Jeff touched upon a little bit earlier, along those public trails. We collaborated with the transport engineers, exploring different trail layout alternatives and preliminary details. And we also proposed potential future uses for these properties and opportunities for site development, which was a big interest for clients as well. So ultimately, we were providing direct benefits to our clients, providing better choices on materials and native plants, awareness of potential issues as well, because we were so aware of the scope and the needs and requirements set by the trustees. We were early on able to bring awareness to the clients when necessary if there could be a potential issue down the road associated to any of these projects. And ultimately, we were able to provide true cost savings and higher efficiency, having all these capabilities in-house as opposed to coordinating with multiple subcontractors or subcontracting the expertise. Next slide, please. And so I couldn't let this pass without touching on outreach as well. We supported our clients in their own outreach program and events, but we also, along the way, produced such an array of graphic material that we really could capitalize on that and use it for multiple venues. We developed these graphics and posters for communication with the public, presented at lectures, site walks, conferences such as Battelle, ASLA. This poster is just one example that we showed at Battelle. We were involved in presentations, roundtables, so we were really able to sell the project and also communicate, get that community buy-in and communicate the advancements of the project and the next steps through the NRD program. We also were able to capitalize on a lot of these graphics for awards and publications, and having us involved in many of the phases of the implementation as well, we were able to take key photography, which was used for outreach opportunities and also publication and communications for the clients. So, more often than not, we have our technicians which are focused on the active work and daily reporting, and we really miss those key shots that really sell our projects and show our capability. So our team was very involved in making sure that we documented the site appropriately for outreach as well. So on a side note, before wrapping up, I did want to note that outreach is goes beyond this project. Our clients continually need more and more extensive support when it comes to communications with the public and selection of materials, graphic materials for communication. And we're not talking only of private clients, but also regulators. Overseers, more often than not, need that extra support to be able to communicate with the community who are concerned about these sites and to be able to give them that positive message and ultimately drive that success and positive public opinion on many of these sites. So moving on to conclusion and wrapping up all of these ideas that we've been sharing with you all today, we wanted to, at the end of the day, we want to drive that the Parsons landscape architecture teams truly do bring a whole array of added services to our clients and ultimately added value to Parsons. Following our enhance, extend, transform growth strategy, we enhance our teams by increasing the diversity of our knowledge base. We end up with stronger teams that drive a much better bottom line with all of our in-house work. We extend our capabilities, working with our stakeholders, working with our clients, providing added services, and ultimately driving better solutions. And we transform the projects, providing better designs, context-sensitive solutions, sustainability-focused approaches, and we differentiate ourselves that way from others. We provide direct benefits to our clients, providing this expertise early on in the process and ultimately providing better solutions to them. And this, of course, ultimately drives project success, which is what we all want, of course. So I would like to thank you all for your patience, especially given the issues. We are ready to take questions from you. A quick point for those of you that are within Parsons, we are in Workplace, so check us out in the Landscape Architecture and Urban Planning group. And you've got contacts on your screen showing who to reach out to if you would like to further discussions beyond these questions, which we'll open up in a few seconds. You've got Jeff there, who you've been listening in on. Norman Flout, he leads the teams that are focused on the Eastern United States region. And, of course, Ron Clark, who leads the teams in Canada. So do reach out. We're always here to help and answer any questions and assist in any way we can. And ultimately, I do believe we are ready to take your questions and answers and are eager to provide you some answers.
Everyone, if you'd like to ask a question in the Q&A, please press *1 on your line. Then make sure that your device is not on mute. Record your name and then press the # key. If you then decide to read a question, press *2. Just a reminder for the audio line questions, press *1, record your name and then press the # key. Alternatively, we also ask a question on the WebEx. To do this, please click on the three-dotted icon at the bottom of the screen, select the Q&A option, type your questions in the box, and click Send to all panelists.
And we do have a question from Dan Moran already. Has Parsons consulted or proposed remediation of the Salton Sea, California? The lake is filled with selenium, phosphates, and arsenic, which is causing a large epidemic of respiratory disease throughout the community.
I am not aware of that, but that doesn't mean that it may not have been happening. It may be one that where they haven't brought the landscape architects into that yet, but at this point, I don't know of us participating in that.
I agree with Jeff. I am not aware that we have been involved. That doesn't mean to say that Parsons hasn't been involved in that project or not. Points to add, however, is on these remedial projects, there is a space where our expertise early on can help drive some designs, especially in overseeing designs when it comes to restoration of impacts, of construction impacts, remedy impacts, and also recovery of the site once the remediation is complete. So our involvement, again, in this kind of project can be very valuable early on throughout the design phase, overseeing the remedial action work plans, O&M plans, you name it, even before a shovel is put in the ground, let alone overseeing the actual remedy and the habitat component of those kinds of remedies.
Dan added a comment here that the state government and the federal government have allocated $400 million as an allotment for that remediation. So definitely worth looking into.
Definitely sounds like an interesting project, yes.
Great.
We have any other questions, either on the phone or feel free to enter them into the chat feature or the Q&A feature.
We have no questions on the audio line so far.
Just one more minute, just in case anybody's still typing.
Yeah.
With that, Jeff, can you advance one more slide? So I wanted to let everybody know that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, this is our final webinar for 2020. We are finalizing our lineup for 2021, and I think we've got a really good lineup of presentations ready for you for next year. We will have a complete listing and flyer for that. That should be out within the next week or so. So be looking for that in your inbox. January's presentation is by Jeff Hale. Jeff is a subject matter expert with Parsons in the area of emerging concerns, emerging contaminants, and he will be discussing environmental surveillance of pathogens. So we'll make sure everybody gets an invitation to that out, because I think you'll want to be present for that one. One other question came in from Yoav Rappaport. Are you finding new uses of roadway paint that are related to smart transportation, and what do you see as coming up in this regard?
Was that roadway paint?
Yes.
New uses of roadway paint. I can't say that I have, unfortunately. I have heard of some creative sustainable uses within roadways for particularly the gravel used in the concrete and all. There was a project up in the Washington State area where they took out. There was a large building that came out, and they busted up all the toilets and used that as part of the gravel, the rock that was used in the concrete. This was a Green Streets project and or Green Roads certified project, and it was they call it Pottycrete. But yeah, but there are a lot of very creative, adaptable uses happening out there, and so it sometimes it's almost hard to stay on top of them, but it's great. It's what we need to do.
I would also add to that, Jeff, in terms of looking forward towards the future of transportation design is also how we evolve in our planting design associated to our transportation corridors. How do we better design green buffers and corridors that have strong plant communities that will evolve and sustain climate change and so on, and still provide that habitat component and improvement to the native community. So I think looking forward from what would be, you would call your traditional transportation planting design, I think there's a lot of room where we can really drive exciting designs moving forward along these corridors, which would bring also community buy-in and all sorts of benefits, including from our regulators, because the DOT departments more and more are being very interested in the use of native plants and more forced out planting pallets.
All right. Marcel, any other questions?
We have no further questions.
All right. Well, then I'm going to thank Jeff and Natalia for your presentation and for the time and effort that's put into that. I want to thank everybody else for joining our presentation today. We do hope you'll have an opportunity to join us again for our next presentation in January. And with that, we will close out the presentation. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.